Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. So, as usual,
Good morning, sir.
hi, good morning.
Sir, today I don't have system, sir, but I'll be logging in through phone.
Okay, okay. We'll start with any questions or observations that you have from the previous session that we had. We'll take up those questions and then we'll proceed with the agenda for today.
Somebody.
Okay. Let me share my screen and then we'll start. You're able to see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
We'll just take a quick look on what we were doing yesterday. So until now, what we have been doing is working with the supervised model in the neural networks. We had experimented only with the supervised model. In the classical algorithms, we had also experimented with the unsupervised learning. But in the supervised learning, we have been given data, we have been given the labels, and then we do different types of algorithms like regression, classification, and object identification is also a category of the classification. Then different problems in the using the NLP also was under the supervised learning because for everything we had a label available. In the session yesterday, we are seeing that how the concept of the unsupervised learning can be extended in the domain of the neural networks also. So here the data would be given to us, but there is no label. And what are the different types of applications that we can do in the neural network where I don't have any labels, I just have the data, and what all things can we do with that? So earlier with the mall visitors data, we had done clustering using the clustering algorithms. Then we had also seen that even if we don't have data, we can do certain other types of operation like dimensionality reduction using the PCA or TSNE. And today our focus would be that not only seeing and analyzing the data, not only just making prediction with the data, which we have done mostly till now. So, but how do we really start creating things, or how do we start creating data or different types of objects? And these could include the images, the voices. How do we really do that? So here it will be unsupervised learning because and different types of images say have been given to us, and then based on that we create a new image. So here there is no label, we are just receiving the images, and based on that we are trying to create certain other images, or based on the voice samples that we have been given, can we create some other uh, speech or dialogue in the voice of a given person. So these are the where we are trying to generate new things, and that's why these are called the generative models. And some of the examples that we have taken, that now the application has become uh, advanced to the extent that it can really fool all of us that what is the fake and what is the real. And then we also talked about the ethical aspects of it, that if if a fake voice can be generated, if a face image can be generated, and once you're able to generate the fake image, then it's very easy to extend that to generate a fake video. Because if you see, the videos are nothing but the slices of the images, just as you know that when we take a movie, um, it will have that how many frames do I have per second. So once I can generate one image, the next question is that can I generate multiple images and put that into the movie frame, and that will become a video. So with certain changes in the movement and the postures, and if you put that into a continuous frame, that will become a video. So not only the possibility arises that one is seeing a fake video, or when we say fake, let's use the word generated videos. So not only we can generate a fake which does not exist, not only we can uh, create a dialogue or we can generate a dialogue, but it can, the same idea can be extended to generate a video which was not really photographed, which was not really videographed. So the system can generate those videos, and that we are already seeing the application. That in the case of the um, autonomous vehicles, or in the case of the gaming, those videos are getting generated by the system. Then we went into that what would be the basic process. So to when we start generating these images or videos or the voice sample, one of the key things that we need to see that how close is our generated object with the original object, and not just for an individual object, but the distribution of those objects. So for example, if I am generating certain faces, then the distribution of the faces which I generate should be very close to the distribution that we had in the original data. And that's where normally we force it to become very close to the normal distribution. So these are the things that we need to do. So the system will actually make a density estimation of the data set which has been given to us as the training data. And then one of the key functions that it will perform is that it has to see, or it needs to ensure that the model we are generating, that also has a probability distribution which is very similar to that. Then we went into the concept of the latent variables, which becomes extremely important for us once we go into the generative model. And we try to understand that what these concepts of the latent variables are. And then one of the examples which was given by Plato, we used, so people are referring to that after 2000 years, and being used extensively, or rather as a seminal concept, as the very fundamental or critical concept when it comes to the generative models. So what are these? The images which have been given to us, or the objects which have been given to us, the voice samples which have been given to us, these are the things that we observe, or these are the things that we see. But we need to figure out what are the actual explanatory variables, or what are the things which actually explain a face. So if we have the human faces and the faces of cats and dogs, we need to understand that what are those critical features which explains that this is a human face and which explains that this is a cat's face. So when we learn to recognize as a child that this is a cat and this is a dog and this is a human being, then somewhere in our brain, we don't really realize it, but somewhere in our brain, certain parameters are getting stored, which says that if these parameters are met, then this would be a dog, and then we are able to identify different shapes and sizes of the dog. So even if uh, one breed of dog looks very different from the other breed of dog, we are able to recognize that these are still dogs. We are able to recognize the cat, whether they are different shapes and sizes and color or in different location. We are able to recognize that. So there is something which is some key things or key variables are getting stored based on which we are able to distinguish one from the other. The question is that can we repeat the same process through our machine learning algorithms? So the similar process which goes on in our human mind, can we really replicate that in the machine learning models? And if we are able to replicate that, then we can put that to a very wide range of problems which we want to solve. And that is the beauty of many of the things which we do outside the human brain in the machines, that we can make use of that in several different domains. The moment we learn that how to create an image, then quickly we can transfer that learning to how to create a voice sample. Quickly we can transfer that to the domain of videography. And similarly, to many other domains, the same knowledge can be transferred. And that is why the machine learning is actually much more scalable than the human brain. Because for us to learn a new thing will require a good amount of time. The transfer learning in the human brain, it happens, but it can't happen as fast as it happens in the machines. So having understood the concept of the latent variables, and the latent variables are the features which actually explain away whatever we are observing. So the process of doing that, we use autoencoders. And what the autoencoder does is that it takes and we'll take the example of an image. It takes an image, then it reduces the dimensionality, and it comes down to some very critical key dimensions or critical variables which actually explain that particular image. That is what the encoding part is. And we call these variables as the latent variables or the vectors of the latent variables. And so the encoding part reduces the dimensionality, and it says that forget about the rest of the things. These are the 5 things, or these are the 10 things which are the most critical in defining this image. And we saw that by doing that process, we can reduce the dimensionality of the digit data set. We'll see that image in the next slide. From 784 dimensions, which was a 28 by 28 image, we were able to reduce that to 5 by 5 or just 25 dimensions, which is a substantial reduction. So it's just about 3% of the entire data that we had uh, can actually explain, or we can manage with just 3% of the data. So if you see 25 is roughly about 3% of 784. So with just about 3% of the data, we can recreate that image. It means that the remaining 97% was not really that critical for us to understand what that digit was about and how that digit can be created. So the auto encoding process helps us to get two very critical things. One is that we get to know what are the true explanatory factors, or what are the key things which explain that image. And because we have now reduced it substantially, now I can work with that much faster, because 784 has now become just 25. So we can do things much faster. My computation can become much faster. So auto encoding has two different legs. One is the encoding leg, that is, we get the image and then we reduce that to the latent variables. And then the test of that, whether these latent variables really represent the image or not, that will come from the decoding part, where we say that, okay, having got these latent variables, can you recreate the image? And if you are able to recreate the image very close to the original image, that means that those were the real latent variables. Otherwise, we would not be able to recreate that. So it has two legs, the encoding leg and the decoding leg. That is what is being shown here. So in the encoding process, mathematically speaking, what we are saying is that we are trying to find out a function which maps the z, which is my latent variable space, and the x, which is my input. So given an x, what would be the z? That is the function that we are trying to optimize. And the
Sir, one question here. Sir, on what scale this will be decoded? Because by seeing this, it may be 8 or it may be in 3 also. So, what percentage it will take, or how it is decoded, sir? Like,
yeah, so we will have several images. So here, just for the sake of demonstration, we are taking one image. But obviously, in the training data that we take, there will be maybe hundreds and thousands of the images of 3 and 4 and 5 and so on, isn't it? So the function that we find here, that will explain different digits, and there would not be just one image. So ultimately, what it will try to find out is that, okay, what are the key characteristics of 3? Just if you go back to our discussion on identifying x, so it may find that these are the 3 or 4 different characteristics of x, which is one arm going to the up, and then there will be 2 arms like that around the core. So what this will find out is what are the key characteristics of 3. Now, what are these key characteristics of 3? It may be something very different compared to what you and I think. Because now the system is going on deriving these features. We are not telling the system that this is how 3 should be identified. So in our mind, the identification of 3 could be very different compared to how the system sees. So what these z would be, that we don't know. We are just asking the and we are not telling the system that you look for these features when you are trying to identify 3. That's not the objective. The objective is the system should figure out what these features are by itself. So in our mind, we might be looking for maybe some 2 half circles to make it 3, but the computer may see it from a very different perspective. So what this z would be, that we are not telling the computer, that it will find out by itself. And how does it find out by itself? It will now generate in the decoding part, it will try to regenerate the image, or the image of 3, and then it will compare, and that becomes our training loss. So every time that we were doing the classification or regression, the basic process, and that's the very fundamental process that we do, is that we are trying to make a prediction. We'll see what the prediction is and what the actual is, and then if the prediction is too far away from the actual, then we come back and modify our function or modify our optimization function. That's the process everywhere, even in the classical method, even in the deep neural network. Only thing is that the process of optimization, how do we do optimization? That process is different. So in the case of the deep learning, we um, create different nodes, then we do the back propagation. That's the process of optimization. But conceptually, it's the same thing. So what this Z would be, I don't know, and we don't need to know. That is for the system to figure out. Okay, is that um, somewhat more clear, Krishna?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, here we are taking input image, we are encoding and decoding, sir. Why do it, sir? Directly we can take input image, then you get output image now.
Yeah, so if we are doing that, then we are not discovering the latent variables. So what is the purpose here? We want to say that if this is a human face, or if this is a digit, or if this is any other object, what are the latent variables? It means that what are those true explanatory variables which determines that this is a human face, which determines that this is a dog's face. So if we just go from this to this, first of all, we don't achieve anything in the process. This is like creating a mirror of whatever we have got. And the main purpose of finding out the latent variables, that we miss out. Now, the main question is that why do I need to find out the latent variables at all? And as we went along, that if we understand the latent variables, then it becomes very easy to manipulate things. If we just go from the image to reconstruction of that image with some different variation without understanding these latent variables, then our ability to manipulate those things and generate new things, we will not have that ability. And this is where I was giving you the example that in other domains that you see, we have human beings have been seeing that the trees and the different objects for millions of years. But once we understood the underlying structure of everything that we have, that it is comprised of certain molecules. So once we know that water is comprised of two atoms of hydrogen and one atom of oxygen, having understood, now I can create water in the lab. I can create water at a small scale, I can create water at a large scale. But unless I understood that water is H2O, it was not possible to create water by combining the hydrogen and oxygen. So in a way, if you see the H2O, where hydrogen and oxygen and its relationship, these are the latent variables of water. Similarly, in the case of say biology, now having understood say now we are able to create babies in the lab, isn't it? But to be able to do that, we had to actually understand the underlying process which goes through in creation of a baby. So once we understood the entire process and we understood the basic variables, now we are able to create babies in the lab. Having understood the molecular structure, now we can clone animals. We can create animals in the lab by just cloning from a single cell, because now we understand that how the different biological beings can be created. Similarly, by understanding the building blocks of an atom, we can see that how by using uranium or thorium, we can generate the so much of nuclear energy. So if you see what machine learning is doing is that it's just following the same scientific process which we have known for several hundred years now, that if we are able to identify for in any domain what are the key elements, and if we can control those key elements, then we can do lot many things which was not possible earlier in the field of medicine, in the field of physics, in the field of biology. A lot of these things we can uh, experiment with. Similarly, if you see the difference between the traditional medicine and the modern medicine, as we know, that we have been treating ourselves for different diseases by use of different herbs or combination of the herbs. What the modern science does, or what allopathy has done, is that it has just understood that when you take a particular herb as a medicine, what are those key elements or what are those molecules which actually act on the body. And if those molecules can be extracted and given to you, so those molecules can be extracted and those molecules can be given to you directly to make it more effective, to make it more targeted. So that is what has happened in the medicine also. So the key thing that we will miss out in that process is that I will not have the understanding of the latent variables. And that is what we saw yesterday, that if I am going to generate the new images and if I know the latent variables, then I can start controlling one variable while maybe keeping others as constant, or we can start combining these things, which we saw in the case of the faces. So let's come to this example first and then we'll go back. So in the faces, we suppose we discover that the orientation of the face is one of the key variables in the images that we have received. There could be many other things like the skin color or the type of nose or whatever. There could be n number of things. But if I derive the orientation of the face as one of the latent variables, then now I can just manipulate that variable. It means that I can give different values to that variable and then recreate the image. And that's how from one face, I can now generate multiple faces which will have different orientation. And that is where the power of the entire thing comes from. So if you see in the entire process of encoding and decoding, finding out the Z is the key process. And once we have understood this Z, that is the point from where the magic can start. Is that clear, Anand?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So the objective is not just to create a similar looking image. The objective is to understand these latent variables so that we can start manipulating that, and we can do much more than just creating or just reconstructing the same image.
Means for latent image, we'll add some other features to.
Yes. So now, once you have got the latent image, now you can start experimenting with, can I introduce maybe one more key feature and see what the impact would be. So
Yes,
just
sir.
as, after having understood the concept of the atoms and the molecules in the lab, now we can start experimenting with creating new molecules, which was not available naturally elsewhere, isn't it? So we can not just combining the hydrogen with oxygen, we can try that. What if you combine hydrogen with chloride or hydrogen with something else, or calcium with sodium, and that kind of experimentation can be done here.
Okay, so
Now,
got it.
one of the things which is very important is that now with the help of the machine learning, if you realize this kind of decoding process, we can apply onto the business data, we can apply to the image processing, we can apply to different domains. And that is where, when we started in the few sessions that we were talking about, that I personally feel that we are just at the beginning of an revolution which will happen with the help of the machine learning, because having understood these key principles, that how things are done, the key question today is not really finding new algorithms. Researchers are doing that and they will continue to do that. The main challenge is that how can we really take these different types of machine learning algorithms and start applying in various types of problems that we have, either the business problems or the health problems or optimization problem in running our traffic networks and all that. So the possibilities of use is actually just left to our imagination. And that's where in the beginning we said that looks like, and I am fairly confident about that, is that machine learning is like the three other key revolutions that we had in the last about 250 years. First was the steam engine, where the mechanical power was externalized. Then it transformed the steam engine into electricity. So we did not have to have the local steam engines, because in the steam engine, the power could not be transmitted from one place to other. So the engine has to be where you need the power. When electricity came, the power could be actually transmitted. It means that you generate the power thousands of miles away and we could use it anywhere. And that led to a different type of revolution or the change in the entire economy. So when the electricity came, then it was only left to the imagination that what you do with that electricity. So somebody invented a fridge. Somebody would say that I can cool or control the atmosphere temperature with that. So somebody came with with AC. Somebody came with an heater. Somebody will came with a mixie, a fan, or running the factories, running the train. So the use of electricity. Now with this electricity, what you can do is left to the imagination of the people. Similarly, when computers came, what we can do with the computers, that is, initially it was only for doing some numerical computation. Then we started processing the image, then voice. Everything became digital. Even the music was not digital earlier. It was all only on the tapes and things like that. But now everything has become digital. Similarly, with the machine learning, different types of algorithms that we are seeing, the challenge is that how do we really apply in different domains, and that's where it is left to the imagination that how we can do it. So this algorithm of the autoencoding generative models, these are also very useful in the sense that once you are able to reduce anything that is available to us, be it business data, be it image, be it voice, or for that matter, even the data about temperature or anything, then wherever we feel that we can do new things by controlling these variables, those things become very important. So in this picture, yeah.
Sir, one question.
Yeah.
So in this case, as you are doing, like as we are in early stage of machine learning, in the sense like the thing, like how useful is this data scientist or data science compared to this deep learning? Sir?
Okay. Yeah. So that question is a very common question, that what is the overlap between data science and the machine learning? Can things be done with only data science? So let me spend some time on that one. So when we say data science has started with data analytics, data mining. So some of these terms you will keep hearing in overlapping context. So data analytics, data visualization, data mining, and data science. These are the 4 or 5 things that you will be hearing about. Let me try to explain that. So if you see, data analytics is a sort of things which you were doing on Excel earlier. I have some data, let me analyze it. And in the data analytics part, there are different types of analytics. One is called the descriptive analytics. It means that you are trying to describe what data I have. So you will say that this is the average this is the standard deviation, this is the skewness or kurtosis, some of these statistical measures, or this is the standard deviation of this data. So first part is the descriptive understanding of data. It means that whatever I have got, I am analyzing that and telling you that this is what the data is. The second part is the predictive data analytics. It means that now that I have, so in the companies also, it's good to understand, in the businesses also, it's good to understand what has happened in the past. But actually, from the management perspective, we can't be satisfied by just knowing that, okay, my sales over the past, say, 5 quarters has been increasing by, on an average, 3% every quarter. That's good to know. And it's good to know that maybe the standard deviation of my sales is very low. It means that I have a consistent sale, or data could say that the standard deviation of your quarterly sales is actually very high. It means that on some quarters I am making a very high sale, on some quarter I'm making a very low sales. It's good to know. But the main question that we as managers or the owners of the businesses would be interested is that, okay, if that has happened, what is likely to happen? So that's where the predictive data science or predictive analytics comes in. So by using different techniques, we make the predictions. And then the third aspect is what we call as the prescriptive data analytics, where we say that, okay, based on the past data, I feel that your sales for the next quarter is going to go up by, say, 5%. And over the next 2 years, you will have a growth rate of, say, 2% per quarter. But then what we would like to know is that, can that 2% be raised to 5%? And that's where the prescriptive data analytics comes in, where we say that now these are the variables and this is the impact of those variables. So for example, if you run a regression, then we'll find out what the coefficient of advertisement is, what the coefficient of the discounts that you have given, what is the relationship between the number of salespeople that you had. So just as we had done some exercises earlier, with the data science or with the regression or different other methodologies, we'll be able to say that if you increase your advertisement by, say, 5%, your sales will go up by 2%. If you hire, say, 50 more people as your salespeople, you're likely to increase your sale by so much. So that becomes the prescriptive data science. It means that we are trying to tell them that, so 3 stages. First, we understand what has happened in the past. Then we understand, then we say that using that data, I can make some prediction. And then we can say that that is the prediction of the as is variables. If you change these variables, then you may be able to change your future outcomes. That becomes the prescriptive data science, where we say that this is the, how much you should spend on discount or advertisement or increasing your sales force, which one is going to be the most effective and which one is going to be the most cost effective. Okay, so these are the 3 things which the data science actually does, and that's the objective of the data science. Now in the data science, the first part, that is the data analytics part and data mining part, is actually dealing with the past data. Now, when it comes to the predictive part, that's where very quickly machine learning has taken over, because the kind of prediction that you can do with the machine learning techniques or the machine learning algorithms, that you would never be able to do with the traditional or the conventional methods. So that's why the machine learning has become the foundation of the data science, especially for the prescriptive and the predictive data science. So as I see that there is roughly about 70 to 80% overlap between what people call as the data science and what you are learning in the machine learning. So any kind of prediction today in data science is being done through the same techniques that you are learning here in the machine learning. Now, what would not be taught in a typical machine learning courses, what would be a part of the data science course, would be maybe there would be a more emphasis on data visualization. So they will be going into different types of data visualization techniques, like say, or tools like Tableau, or so there will be more emphasis on data visualization, because as a data scientist, there is a good emphasis on how the findings of the prediction or the past analysis are getting presented. So that's one difference, but that's not the in today's scenario. Data science will also be focusing somewhat more on how to deal with big data. So different frameworks like say Hadoop or Spark, these things they would be studying in their data science courses. Apart from, and there would be somewhat more emphasis on statistics, because data scientists are supposed to know much more statistics compared to a person who is, say, expertise in machine learning. So, but the statistics and calculus, as we saw, is required for the machine learning also. So let's see the difference between the data science and machine learning as it stands today. There are certain areas where the difference is on emphasis, and there are certain areas which will be unique to data science. The areas of emphasis where it would be different will be statistics. So data scientists need to know more about statistics, or they are actually supposed to know more about statistics. Second thing is the visualization. They're supposed to go a bit deeper into how data can be visualized, whereas for us, it is not that important. We have learned different techniques like say pair plot and the histogram. Um, so those things and heat map, those things we have learned, which was basic for us to understand our machine learning projects. But the data scientists would be going slightly deeper into it. The key areas which would be exclusive to data science will be how to deal with big data, how to put that, how to create a data lake on the cloud, how to create a data warehouse. Those things in machine learning we are not really concerned with, because that would be handled by somebody else. But since the entire predictive and prescriptive analytics has now moved into machine learning, about 80% of the data science job is today being done with the machine learning alone. So there is a good amount of overlap, but there are certain specific things. So, and if we come to the deep learning side, then data scientists would actually should be knowing that yes, image processing can be done, but their objective or the main things that they will perform will not be in the video processing or the image manipulation. So data scientists are supposed to know what is deep learning, but the application of that in different types of domains, I mean, their focus would be more on certain specified area and not going into each of these things that we have studied in deep, like NLP or CNNs or the different types of architecture. So that is where the overlap between the machine learning and data science is. But if you see the syllabus across different universities or different online courses, you will see that data science is now about 80% of the data science is just machine learning.
Why I asked this question is like many mails are coming like apply for PG diploma in data science, unnecessary. So just wanted to know like what exactly it is. So that is why just I stop you in between.
Yeah. So I hope it gives you some more clarity on what data science is and what machine learning is. Many times, these things would be used interchangeably, but it's good to know that what are the overlaps, what is the difference in the emphasis. So that's what explains. So we'll come back to our discussion unless we have any more question either related to this or anything else. So we saw that how with the encoding process we can reduce the dimensionality. I mean, not just the dimensionality, but the purpose here is to understand the key variables, and that we achieve through coding and encoding. Then we came to the other important aspect is that what we achieve in the encoding process is a set of Z. Now these are the deterministic values, or these are the defined numbers. So it will say that this is the variable and these are the values. Then we go one step further and say that rather than just finding one value, can we find out the distribution of these values? If you remember in our classification problem also, we get the output as say 0 or 1 or to which class it belongs to. But the output that we are getting from our optimization model is actually giving you the probability distribution across different classes. So when we were doing the MNIST data set on fashion, the output was, it is giving you that what is the probability that this is a shoe versus the probability that this is a bag versus that this is a trouser and things like that. So it was giving the probability across all the outputs that we wanted. And then we were saying is that whichever is having the highest probability, the item should belong to that particular category. You recall that? So in the same fashion, what we are saying here is that rather than a deterministic thing, can we find out the probability distribution of each of these variables? And how it will help us is that it will help us understand on each different variables. For example, skin color, I have one variable. So how the skin color would be distributed in my data set across the fair skin and dark skin and different tones of the skin. So that's what we go to the next level, and we say that rather than getting a deterministic value of the Z, can we get a probabilistic value or a probability distribution of this each element in the or each vector that we have in Z? So that is called the variational autoencoder. So we go step by step. We have a plain and simple autoencoder which gives us the deterministic value of Z. Then we say that can we get the probability distribution of each variable in Z? That is what we achieve by variational autoencoder. Now in this process, since we are saying that let's get the probability distribution of each variable in Z, the question would be that what should be this probability distribution? And we say that normally we would follow the normal distribution and say that can we get a normal distribution of the each variable in Z? Okay. Now, if we are saying that it should be following a normal distribution, then that becomes the another factor to in our optimization process. So we are not just finding out the difference between the input data X and what we have the reconstructed image, what can be called as the X hat. That is what we were doing in the auto encoding process. So we were trying to loss between the original data and the reconstructed data. That is what we were optimizing. Now, if we are trying to say that not just the deterministic value, but find out an normal distribution of this, then I may have got, so the system may generate some distribution and we would like to enforce a normal distribution. And therefore, I also need to know the difference between the current distribution that I have got, the actual distribution that I have got, and the normal distribution. So in the variational autoencoder, we'll try to optimize two things. One is the reconstruction loss, and the second is the difference between the normal distribution and the actual distribution which the system is giving me for each latent variable. Now the loss or the difference between two different distributions is found out by what is called as the KL divergence or the Kullback-Leibler divergence. So as I mentioned yesterday, that we don't need to go into the mathematics of that. It is important to understand that KL divergence is the measure which tells you that the two distributions are how different they are. So if the distribution is larger, then it becomes another factor to optimize. So in the variational autoencoder, we optimize two things. One is the reconstruction loss, that is what is the value of x and the x hat, what we reconstructed, and what is the difference between a normal distribution and the actual distribution of each of these z. So if we do that, then I have the a distribution of a near normal distribution of each of these latent variables. Then another concept that you should remember is that the back propagation requires the deterministic values. And therefore, once you have the latent variables, and if we have the distribution of the latent variables, we call that the latent space, because there are not many things there, not just the deterministic value. So we call that as a latent space. So once you have converted the z to a distribution of z, or not just one value, but it tells you that how likely a particular value is going to be, then we can't run the back propagation, because the back propagation does not run on a distribution. It does require a deterministic value. And to be able to do that, we use trick, which is called the reparameterization trick, where we externalize the distribution to epsilon, and z becomes one deterministic value. Okay. So after we do the reparameterization, then even the back propagation will run on our variational autoencoder. Now, having got those, now I can start manipulating these factors. So we can manipulate the pose, we can manipulate the pose and smile, and you can do these changes on 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions. And now we have the handle on how do we really change, or how do we, so this gives us now a new flavor or new dimension to what kind of things that we can generate. So in the autoencoder, we were trying to reconstruct. Now in the reconstruction process, we can use different variations. And that's where the new types of images which were not seen earlier, or which were not even photographed earlier, we can do that. So all these, I may have taken, say, only a sample of the photographs during the training, or I had the access to maybe say only 10 or 15 of these images. But now I can actually create the images that how this person would look like from this pose or that pose, or when he smiles a bit, or when he smiles very broadly, how would the face look like? All these things can be done. And then this was the example that if we have the different latent variables, for example, the gender or age or hair length or glasses or pose, if you're able to take out those latent variables, then we can combine and control and change those variables. So here you can see that from these images, as we draw these different latent variables, now we can apply different shapes and sizes on the bottoms, on the images in the bottom, and then we can derive different types of images. We can actually project that how a person would look like at 40, how a person is likely to look like at 50, and how a person might have looked like as a child. Some of these things can be found out. And actually it does this with a fair degree of precision. Now we'll move to another very interesting and very important aspect, which is, so once we have this, I think this, yeah, combining. So this process of changing these variables, that is called the latent perturbations. It means that you are perturbing the values which I have obtained, and then you start getting the different images. Another very important thing is a very important kind of network which has emerged, which is also being used very extensively nowadays in image generation, is called the generative adversarial network. So what we do in this process is that once I have got the latent space, and maybe we can start with some random latent space as well. So say I have some latent space which could be randomly generated, or I have generated that using the autoencoder process. What we do is that we now generate an image. So I have one network for generating these images based on certain latent variables. Now, what we do is that we create another network which will say that whether this image is fake or real. So I have two different networks. One network generates the image. The second network takes the actual sample, and then it says that whether this image which was generated by the generator network is fake or true. Okay. And then the output of that, or the finding of that, is sent back to the generator network. So in the auto encoding process, we are trying to find out the latent space. Now with this new type of network, it's another way of finding out the latent spaces. So I can start with any random thing, and then we'll generate an image. So since I am starting with some very random things, the first image that we generate would be something very odd. I mean, because it's not the real latent variable. So it will generate some image. Then I'll set that image will be fed into the discriminator network, and this network is the main job of this network is to determine whether it is a real image or a false image. So I have taken one image, assumed a few things to be the latent variable, then I recreate that image or generate an image. Then from the real samples, the discriminator will say that whether this image is a fake one or a true one. Then I'll get the output. And suppose this discriminator says that no, this is not a human face. Whatever you have fed into me, by seeing several other human faces, I can say that this is not a human face. Okay, or it will give the its own output in the terms of probability, that what you have fed is only 0.5% or say 5% probability that this is a human face. That input will now come back to the generator. So I have the feedback that whatever we generated, and whether it was perceived to be a fake or a real one, based on that, now in the generator network, we will run the optimization process and try to refine these variables. Okay. So the second iteration will generate another image, which possibly, because of the back propagation we have done and the optimization process that we have done, second image might be slightly more refined. Then again, we feed that image to the discriminator network. The discriminator network again compares that with the sample images that we have. Then again, it gives back its own feedback that this is a fake, or it is closer to the real sample. And this process will keep going on and on. What happens here? That in the process, the generator network becomes more and more efficient in generating the kind of images that we want. And the discriminator network, that becomes more and more efficient in distinguishing between a real image and a fake image, because we are running, the objective of this discriminator is to find out the to distinguish the fake from the real, or the generated from the real. So I have the access to the real images, then I will get the generated images. The discriminator network is getting trained on identification of the fake. So on the one hand, the generator network is becoming more and more efficient in generating real life like images. On the other hand, the discriminator network is becoming more and more efficient with training in distinguishing a real with the fake. So as this process continues, then both these networks become more efficient, and therefore, as the discriminator becomes more efficient in identifying the fake, now the job of the generator actually becomes more difficult. The generator now has to create the images which are more and more close to the real life. So if we train just one network, then maybe discriminator is not becoming more efficient. So at some point of time, the generator would generate some image and the discriminator will not be able to identify. But the discriminator itself is getting trained with every iteration, and therefore this one is also becoming more and more efficient in identifying the fake from the real. So it becomes like a competition between the two. So the generator is generating, and the discriminator is acting like an adversary. So he says that, okay, you generate the fake image, I will find out that this is not real. So they act like an adversary, and that's why the network is called the GAN, or the generative adversarial network. So it is a combination of two different neural networks. One is getting trained on generating an image. The second one is getting trained on discriminating that generated image and saying that whether it is true or false. So with good number of iterations, what happens is that the generative network becomes very efficient in creating a real life like image. And that's where we saw in the beginning that the images that now we are able to generate is so close to the real life that even with the human eyes, we can't really distinguish that this person does not exist. And that is being done with this kind of network, where it's actually a combination of the two networks. One generates, one identifies that this is a fake or not. Is this clear? What is the GAN network?
Yes, sir. Understood, sir.
Okay. So let's see how the process goes. If you see here, it is showing you that as the training time and the resolution both are changing with the training time, and how the images are getting refined with more training that the system has. Now if you see, what is the process? The first we start with just a 4x4 space. Okay, it means that latent variables are 4x4, so that's a very low level resolution, and then the system generates, and then the discriminator finds out that what is fake and what is real. So the discriminator also starts with a 4x4 kind of image, and we go into a step that is with every, now that both the networks are trained by in processing say 4x4 images, then we increase the resolution and say that now let's do the same process with 8x8 image. Then we do the same process with 16x16 image, and we go on increasing the resolution. And you see that on the right side, you see that how it starts looking more and more precise and more sharp and more real life. And obviously these networks are very computation intensive. So the examples it is showing you that on some hardware, it has taken maybe 8 days or 9 days to train these networks. So that is how the GANs actually train, and you can see in this process that how it is going on refining, and it becomes more and more precise and more difficult to distinguish. Okay, so the kind of precision that you saw in the first photograph, it is being derived, or it is being created based on this kind of training using the generative adversarial network. So it's like a competition between the thief and the police. The thief says that I will create new ways to steal things, and police is saying that okay, let me devise new ways to find out the thief. Or it's like what you see in the cyber security nowadays. The hackers are trying to find out new and new ways to hack machines, and the cyber security people are trying to find out new and new ways to prevent them from hacking. So the same concept of the somebody is trying to move in one direction, and the other one is trying to say that I will not allow you to do that. Same thing is here, that the generative network is trying to create the fakes, and the discriminative network is saying that okay, if you try to create the fake, I will be able to tell you that whether it is fake or not. So in that process, both of them become more and more efficient. The generative network starts producing much more real life like image, and because the discriminative network is also being trained simultaneously, which becomes more and more efficient in identifying the fake from the real. Now, because of this increasing capability of the discriminating network, the generative network also becomes more and more efficient in trying to say that what are the other things that I can do so that the picture doesn't really look like a fake. Now, if we can do that on the images or the photos, the next extension would obviously be that why I can't extend this to videos, which is nothing but a combination of the different data frames. So if you see a video, if I have a video of say a running horse, so suppose if I have a 5-minute video and I have say 1000 data frames for that 5-minute video. So I can take up each data frame and consider that as one image, and then start manipulating those key latent variables in each data frame. And if I apply the same variation in each data frame, then if I run the video, I will have a video with a different data frame, which you will see in the next one. So you see a horse is running. Now we are applying certain variational features or the variational encoding that we have seen earlier. So we run and here we say we apply the skin color. So a skin color is one of the latent variables. So suppose in this video I have 1000 frames. So I'll go frame by frame and I manipulate the skin color. That is what has been done in this video. So horse has certain skin color. The skin color is one of the latent variables. Now I manipulate that and say that change the skin color from whatever it is now to the skin color of zebra. And if I apply that in each frame, then rather than just changing a video, just changing one photograph, now I have been able to convert a full video. Of course, this would be very, computation intensive, but still I am able to do that, or you would be able to do that, because now I have been able to derive the skin color as one of these latent variables, and then I apply another variation of the skin color in each frame of the photo, and I can convert the video of a horse running into a video with a horse running with the skin of this zebra. So these are the kind of things that you would be able to do. Now, you can also see that not only the, in this video, not only the skin color has been changed, but I have trained, say, certain, I have trained the network on, say, where the zebras live, or I have uh, done the same process of encoding on where zebras live, and I have on the zebras, and I have trained my network on the horses. The system also learns that if a zebra lives in a different type of habitat, and therefore if you see, the other thing which has also been changed here is the kind of the background that you have. So maybe the zebras live in a different type of habitat normally, so even that can be changed. So the background can be changed, the skin color can be changed. So here there is a possibility that, you know, horses, suppose we say that horses are mostly found in the, you know, in the plains, and you have the greenery and a different type of environment, and zebras live mostly in the dry areas. So I would be able to take the background also, and if we are able to extract the background as one of the latent variables, then I can also change the entire background. So these kind of possibilities does emerge with the GAN. Now this process, what we are doing for the videos, it's called the cycle GAN, because here what you are doing, the another twist which has been brought into the cycle GAN is that you run two different GAN networks. So each GAN is comprised of two neural networks, generator and the discriminator. For the video processing, we normally use the cycle GAN. It means that I run two different GAN networks together. So it's just the extending the same idea into different dimensions with more computing power, with the more images that you have. That's called the cycle GAN. So what it does is that it first tries to convert the horse into a zebra. Then again, the second network tries to convert a zebra into horse. Okay. So if you have seen in the GAN, what it does that it will convert, say, one image from the other. So it will convert, say, a horse into zebra. Then it will say that whether zebra is looking like a horse or not. And the second network will actually do the reverse. It will take that zebra and convert it into horse. So that way it becomes more realistic. And of course, as you can figure out that this has not done a perfect job, because the backside of the image, that is the hips of the horse, that has not been fully laid out the zebra skin. So what it has done on the body, on the legs, it is not done so well here. So obviously some more optimization would be required here. So that's the cycle GAN, where we take two different GAN networks, one from horse to zebra and second from zebra to horse. And that's how the system goes on perfecting it better and better. And we are able to convert from one shape to another, or some latent variable we are able to change, like the skin color in this example. And skin color and the background in this example has been changed. And obviously you can do much more. So that's where the ability of the systems to generate new types of images has become possible. And most of the things that you see in gaming is generated like this. So we take an image of, say, different streets, and then we can generate, depending upon what this game is about, we can generate the background images of whether somebody is running around in the streets on the bike, or somebody is driving on different types of roads. So right now you have started getting a very realistic images in the gaming world. And that is one of the reasons why in the machine learning, the gaming companies like NVIDIA, because they have been producing these GPUs, they have also become a very important player because they do a lot of work on machine learning. So although their traditional business was gaming and maybe creating new types of chips, but because the GPUs, which was created by where they invest a lot, because the entire gaming was around graphic processing. That how do you ensure that there is no lag in the images that we put on the screen? Because if you have the lag, then you can't really play around a game so efficiently. They had invested substantial amount of money and time on creating the GPUs or making the GPUs more effective, and also on they have been working very extensively on different types of machine learning algorithms to be able to generate those fake images. And that is one of the reasons that companies like NVIDIA have become a very important player in the machine learning space as well. Now, having done this, we see, so whatever we are seeing today is a very important revelation, that how do we take the something that we do in one domain or something that we do for say one type of thing, how do we really transfer this learning into doing other kind of things? So for example, we saw the process of auto encoding, and there the idea was that can I reduce the dimension and reproduce the image? Then we take it to the next step and say that why only to reproduce? Can we alter the image? And that's where the variational autoencoder came in. To be able to alter the image, I can't work with those deterministic numbers. I need to have probability distribution of that. So we got to the variational autoencoder, where we started saying that why only to reproduce? Why not to, in the process of reconstruction, why can't we bring certain variation? And we saw that how do we bring the variation in the pose and the smile and so on. Now it was taken to the next level and say that, okay, now we are able to generate this, but how do we really train the network more efficiently so that it becomes more and more real life? And then we said that why only have one network? Let's train two networks who act like an adversary to each other. It's like a thief and the police game. It's like the hacker and the cybersecurity game, that one generates the image and the second one goes on refining its ability to identify the fake from this one. Then we came to with the GAN. Now with the GAN, that we are able to generate a real life like image. Again, you extend the scope of that and say that the videos are nothing but a sequence of different frames. So if I apply the same thing on all the frames one by one, then I can convert a video and I can change the characteristics of the video. And that's where we are seeing that the horse and the zebra skin, that is placing a zebra skin on the horse, that can be done. Now, we can apply the same thing to voice synthesis. So the question would be that if I am able to apply this on the different types of images and videos, how do I really apply this onto the voice generation or voice synthesis? And there you have seen this spectrogram of the sounds. So then we say that if we take the spectrogram of the sound, then this spectrogram is nothing but an image. So as I am running the GAN network or the cycle GAN on the images, now my image is not a horse. Now my image is not a living being. My image is the spectrogram of the voice. So if I run the same network on the spectrogram of the voice, then I will be able to extract the latent variables of the voice spectrogram. Then I know that what are the latent variables or the true explanatory variables between the voices of two people, between the voices of, say, a male and a female. And having understood those unique variational features, now I can manipulate. So if I have, say, the voice of Obama here, it will have certain different spectrogram because the tone that he speaks with, the different, the tone, the tenor, the accent, all these things would be captured in the spectrogram. So if I analyze this spectrogram and suppose I have the first one, this male one is suppose Obama, and male two is say Trump. Now I can analyze this spectrogram, and then I can train my GAN network to say that generate a spectrogram which is very close to the voice of the Trump, generate a spectrogram which is very close to the voice of Obama. So this is like again generating a human face where it is not able to, we reach a stage where we are not able to distinguish between the real and the fake. Now we take the voice spectrogram of different people and then train a GAN network to ask it to generate the new voice sample and let the discriminatory network identify that whether that voice was real or not. So if we convert the human voice from the waveform into a spectrogram, then I can use my GAN network to generate new spectrograms which will be very close to the voice of, or which will again be not able to distinguish that what is real and what is fake. And then we convert these spectrograms to the waveform, and then we can play it. So is this clear that how the GAN network can also be used for voice synthesis? Any questions?
No, sir.
Sir, then whole music industry can be converted like this, I guess, sir.
You have already done a small thing earlier in the Irish folk music generation using deep learning. Of course, not, we have not used the, so now if you see, you are now thinking in the right direction, and that is what everyone who is learning the machine learning has to apply their mind. So I think what your mind is working at is that by analyzing the spectrogram of, say, a song sung by S.P. Balasubramaniam, and I write a new song which he has never sung,
Yes, sir.
will I be able to generate that that particular lyrics into the voice of S.P. Balasubramaniam, or for that matter, anyone else? So the theoretical possibility is of course there, but the what I have seen till now is that we are able to generate the dialogues or the normally spoken words to a very large extent. They have become realistic. But I think the songs and the music, there is some work would still be required, because the kind of the variation in the tones and all that which comes in different songs, that kind of successful experimentation, at least I have not done till now. But whether this is possible to do, yes, this is definitely possible to do, because if we can generate, say, a dialogue which was never spoken by Obama, if I can generate that with fair degree of accurateness, then there is no reason that sometime later I will be able to generate the voices in S.P. Balasubramaniam. But having done that, I don't think it's going to stop there, because then I will be able to generate artificial voices by combining the different latent variables, just as I am able to generate an artificial face at some point of time, and I think that point is not very far. I will be able to generate artificial voices which might be even more sweeter than the singers that we have. or which might be even more appealing than the singers that we have, because all the singers, they come with certain natural voice which has its own limitation. But if we do that, if we bring those properties into my machine, then I can actually combine the voice of S.P. Balasubramanian with Kishore Kumar, or Kishore Kumar with Muhammad Rafi, and I should be able to generate a voice pattern which is taking maybe the best features of both. And then that singer could possibly become more appealing to the masses compared to either Kishore Kumar or Muhammad Rafi or S.P. Balasubramaniam on their own, because we can combine the best features of Muhammad Rafi and S.P. Balasubramaniam and Kishore Kumar. So these possibilities are definitely there in the domain of uh, machine learning. I am sure that different people are working on that, but as of now, I haven't really seen an artificially generated songs. So the instrumental music, yes, as we discussed when we were talking about the Irish folk music, that the instrumental music, generation of different instrumental music, generation of different types of jingles, that's already being done mostly by the computers nowadays. But in the human voice, maybe some more work is required, some more training is required. So in fact, there used to be a site called Lyrebird, where this was started by some students in University of Toronto, and there you could give your voice samples, and then you could type out another a sentence there, and then it will read out in your voice. So not just experimenting with the some samples of Obama or Trump, you could actually experiment your own voice. So you give a sample of your voices there, then it will analyze and do this encoding of your voice, and then you type out another sentence, and that sentence would be read out in your voice. So those kind of experimentations are being done already. So the again, one of the books I was reading on machine learning is, it now says very emphatically that we have entered a stage where the machine learning has actually moved out of the labs, and it has reached the laptops of the developers and entrepreneurs. It means that machine learning is no more in the domain of researchers only, because things, as you have seen, things have been simplified to a large extent, that by spending say 3 months or 4 months, we are able to do a lot of things. And as we do more and more experimentation, we'll be able to do a lot more. And if we have that kind of computation power available, maybe we could have taken a case study in GAN also, but it requires a lot of computation power, and we will not be able to see that in the classroom itself. But knowing the process, we can actually train again ourselves. It need not be only in the domain of Google and Facebook or some other universities, but it just requires some more computing power, some more time. But the base that we have built in our classes, we should be able to proceed with these things as well. So what I was trying to say is that today the machine learning has moved out of the labs, out of the academic institutions, and has taken a shape where you and I can start experimenting with many new types of things. And that's where even the big tech companies and the startups both are trying to see that how the machine learning can be used in different domains to simplify life, to solve different types of business problems. So I like the way that your thought is going, Anand, that whether it is possible or not. So yes, it is possible. And that's where the entire possibility resides, in whatever we have learned in one domain, in applying that into another domain. So why not to think about generating a synthetic voice or a synthetic singer? It is absolutely possible. And that singer possibly could be even better than any human singer that we have. Okay, I think
Yes, sir.
that might have been the last slide on the generative networks. So I have now, so this generative network, that's all I wanted to discuss. I think today we'll not have sufficient time to go into the next kind of network, which would be the reinforcement learning. So we'll speak about and take some examples of the reinforcement learning next week. And with that, I think whatever I wanted to cover, the different types of networks that you should be knowing as a part of deep learning. So that would be the last type of deep learning network that we will be discussing, unless there is something specific that you want to bring about and want me to cover. So with that, which will take maybe next weekend and possibly going into the next weekend, will bring us to the end of the deep learning. So also think about it, that is there something else that you would like me to cover? Otherwise, we have covered the simple artificial neural network. Then we went into the recurring neural network, the convolutional network, and then the different other variations of these concepts into autoencoder, generative adversarial network, the cycle GAN. There are different, the variations which people have made to these networks is actually uh, unending. But we will try to cover the main ones, which is making a big amount of difference in the industry today. That's what my plan is. So if there is something else that you would like me to cover, get back to me. Otherwise, reinforcement learning would be the last type of machine learning that we will discuss. And after that, we'll maybe spend some more time on doing some, projects and trying to give you a more hands-on. But as far as the explanation part is concerned, I think we are coming towards the end of the course.
Yes, sir, I have few questions, sir.
Yeah. Yes,
No?
Andy. Yeah.
Sir, that we were discussing PCA, no, sir?
Discussing what?
PCA, sir.
BCA. Yeah.
In that we give n components is equal to 2, correct, sir?
No, so there you can actually give any number.
Yes, sir. Actually, what we are doing there, sir, like, are we removing certain features, or we are clubbing all the features into 2 dimension?
Yeah, so the PCA it can leave the features as they are, or it can combine different features into one. So in the PCA, you give 2 or 3 only if you want to visualize.
Yes, sir.
So we had discussed in the context of visualization. So the PCA, the principal component analysis, it finds out the linear relationship between different features that you may have, and then if the collinearity is high, it has the process of converting that into a single feature. So it can actually create new features. Or suppose there is one feature and there is no other feature which is highly correlated, then that feature would be left as is. And we don't have a limitation on how many components you want to use. That n components could be 2, it could be 50, depending upon how many features you actually want to deal with in the end.
Okay, sir.
But as we discussed during the when we were comparing the PCA and the TSNE, is that PCA will work well only if your features have a linear correlation, because the entire logic of the PCA works on the linear correlation. So if you have a Swiss roll kind of data which has a correlation, you there is a correlation, but that correlation is not linear. Let me try to draw that once again. So if you see this kind of a structure, there is a correlation because it is expanding circularly in a circular manner. So there is a correlation in this graph also. But the PCA will actually fail very badly here because the PCA will understand only the correlation, only the linear correlation. But in this kind of relationship, there is no, whatever way that you draw a line, it will have a very low linear correlation. So PCA would work well if the features have a high linear correlation. If it is not,
Okay, sir.
then it is only the TSNE will work. Okay. But TSNE, we have seen that it has the limitation. It's very highly computation intensive. And therefore, if you want to reduce the dimension with the help of TSNE, your data set must be small. And it also becomes extremely difficult because the order of computation that you need to do is actually exponential. It means that if you are taking, say, 2 minutes to process 1,000 records, then it will take you 4 minutes to process 2,000 records, and it will go on increasing exponentially. So it becomes extremely difficult to deal with a large data set.
Yes.
But now you would be able to correlate now that whatever we are doing with TSNE and PCA, in another context, the autoencoder actually is also doing the same thing, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Autoencoder and the PCA look similar, sir.
Yes. So autoencoder using a neural network. So PCA and all that, it works on the classical methods where the foundation is statistics.
Yes, sir.
Whereas if you go to the deep learning methodologies like, say, autoencoder or the variational autoencoder, now it will work, it will find out the same thing using the neural network technology. So as we have seen that the regression that we worked with earlier, once we brought that into the deep neural network architecture, we actually got a much better result compared to the classical method of finding regression. So similar to the autoencoders and the variational autoencoder would possibly be giving us a much better result compared to the statistics-based
PCA.
models like PCA.
Yes, sir. And also, sir, how are the job requirements for machine learning people, sir, once we complete this course?
Yeah, so see, we as I see that in the Indian IT companies also, many of these companies will distinguish the job opportunities into two areas. One is that the large Indian IT companies like, say, TCS and Infosys, obviously they are the largest job creators. And by seeing their balance sheet and the type of things that they have started doing, I see that in the field of the digital and the new technologies, they are increasing their revenue share much faster compared to what they were doing earlier. It means that they are doing a lot of work in the digital transformation area, and data science and machine learning are important part of that. So I suppose even in the outsourcing business, lot much more is being done today compared to just about 2 years back, and that becomes very clear if you see their financial results and how much business they are earning from which kind of area. So there are a good number of opportunities coming from there. And the second one is, of course, in the startup world. So in the startup world, I don't see any startup actually coming up which is not considering machine learning as one of their key building blocks, be it a startup in the field of health or be it a startup in the field of finance, or logistics. I mean, if you see a startup, it has to have some people with machine learning exposure. So these are the two extreme ends of the kind of companies which are doing the work. One is on the startup world, and one is also the increasing opportunities in the established uh, companies. The third one is wherever you have the in-house team, for example, in banks or different brokerage firms, or for that matter, different type of companies which have an internal team, internal IT team. So in those internal IT teams also, they are creating small units. I would say that these units still remain small. It means that in each of these, you will have about 6 to 10 member team which is working on machine learning. They are on to doing something experimental, because each CTO or each CIO, it is now on their one of their key performance areas, that what are you doing on machine learning, what are you doing on artificial intelligence. So even um, companies which are into, say, manufacturing, like say Havels or Usha, I know that these companies are also have created some small machine learning teams, which are at this point of time, majority of them I see are at an experimental stage. It means that they are trying to see that how machine learning can actually be used in different areas. So these are the three areas where in all the places I see that people are looking for the machine learning expertise. And being able to demonstrate that you have done some real projects and your knowledge is not completely theoretical, it becomes very important. And that's where we go back to one of the discussion that we had earlier, that you need to create your own online profile on GitHub and maybe on Kaggle, to demonstrate to people that yes, you have done this project, this project. And that would be very important to show during your interviews. So for going to the interviews, for going to the job market, I think the two things that all of you should start doing if you want to make a switch to machine learning. One is that go through the entire thing and entire discussion that we had earlier, and try to prepare the FAQs, that is the frequently asked questions. And we can work together on that one, that what are the frequently asked questions when you go for a machine learning job interview. Okay. Second thing is that when you go to the interview, are we in a position not just to talk about our projects, but in front of the interviewer, you can say that I will show you what I have done. Go to the GitHub, open up your profile and show there that these are the 10 projects that you have done. And along with the notebook, along with the explanation, along with the data, you should be able to demonstrate that. And that, if I am on the other side of the table, that actually will impress me much more compared to a person who just tells me that yes, I have done this was the context, this was the process I followed, rather than doing an explanation verbally. If somebody is able to open in front of me and say that, see, this is how I went about solving the California housing price prediction or digit recognition. So these are the two areas that I think all of you should start working on if you really want to make a change compared to what you're doing.
Sir, since we are freshers to this machine learning and deep learning, can we keep a fake of 1 year experience in machine learning in our CV?
Yeah, see, the kind of thing that you have done, if you are on top of all the experimentation that we have done, all the case studies that we have done, I can tell you with a fair degree of confidence that this 1 year of experience will fly. It means that, but you must be on top of all the notebooks that we have done. It means that you should be able to understand
Yes,
each
sir.
and every line of those notebooks. If you are able to understand and explain to people, then it will actually uh, that is what I would expect from a person who is having, say, 1 or 2 year of experience. Because I have really worked with the people today. What happens is that 1 year of experience is very uh, when we get people from the market, or say fresher or even the laterals who start working on machine learning for the first time.
Yes, sir.
Whatever we have done over the past, say, about 6 months or so, that is what they end up doing in the 6 months, even in the organizations. So, and only after that they start experimenting with the real data belonging to their organization or their customer. So, I think 1 year experience, but I would like to clarify that 1 year of experience will fly if you are on top of all your notebooks.
Yes, sir.
Then it would fly. I don't think anyone would be able to question that based on what you are telling me. It doesn't look like that you have not worked on real projects in machine learning for last 1 year. And the approach here would be that when you are putting it on GitHub, people will ask the question that, but where is the, these are the, uh, say, public projects. What about your company projects? And there you obviously have the defense that the company projects are proprietary and therefore that can't be put on the GitHub.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So nobody is going to question you, or nobody is going to insist you that I want to see the work that you have done for your company, because that is proprietary. You're not even supposed to discuss that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that way, 1 year of experience, or I would say if you are in good control of the entire concept and how to implement it, it will even pass for a bit higher. So even 2 year of experience on having worked on the real life projects. Other thing that you should always keep in mind that everybody in the machine learning unit does not get to work on everything,
Yes, sir.
and therefore, even if you falter in one area, or suppose if the interviewer is saying that but looks like that, say, in the life cycle process, if you see the steps that we have taken is that we get the data. One part is data preparation.
Yes, sir.
Second part is the model selection, model fine tuning, and third part is the analytics on, say, what are the different types of matrices that we use? Why do we use this matrix or that matrix in classification?
Yes, sir.
So all these things typically in a fairly sized organization would not be done by a single person. Okay, so suppose if on the performance side, if you are not able to answer a question that, okay, why have you used the F1 score and not precision, you could always say that actually my work in the organization focused more on model building and model tuning rather than the analysis, because that was being done by the domain experts. So these kind of things will actually help you project once you visualize that what kind of questions would come and how do I answer that. I think putting an experience of 1 year or even up to 2 years should not be a problem at all. But all of you are looking for, I mean, if you want to make a change, will that be only in Bangalore, or you are also willing to move around?
Sir, if it's a starting case, anywhere is fine, sir, because once we get hands-on experience on machine learning, then we can change to anywhere, sir.
Okay, sure.
Sir, and can we push all the projects to GitHub, sir? You have all the codes now. We can
Yeah.
create our own Expert Bridge GitHub account and we can push there.
Yes, I will have it done.
Yes, sir. Sir, and also Shubham said that he will be giving KT on Git and GitHub, sir.
Yeah, I'll try to get him onto the session next week.
Yes, sir.
Sir, by
Sir,
your
Sir, and
Yes,
also, hello.
Continue, Anand. Continue.
Sir, and also we have that boosting technique, no, sir, for our classical programming, and I think we didn't cover that
Yeah.
topic, sir.
Sure. I will cover the boosting and bagging. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for reminding that. I think we have skipped that one. So I'll cover the boosting and bagging.
Yes, sir, because I was going through one blog and there they said in Kaggle competitions, usually they use boosting and more deep learning to win competitions.
Sure.
Yes.
Sir, any reference can be given from your side in Hyderabad or somewhere?
Reference means reference for the job opportunities or
Yes, sir,
reference
job
after
opportunity.
you have got selected.
For job opportunities.
Sure. So why don't all of you who want to make a switch share your CV with me, and then I will see that the opportunities which come across me, whether they would be suitable for that kind of thing or not, and then I will try to connect the job opportunities with you as well. So
Sir, once the course ends, is it okay if we share the CV, sir? Because since you will get us some projects, hands-on projects to do in class, it will be more confident.
yeah. So even after the course ends,
Yes, sir.
our association will not end, because as I've said to you in the very beginning, that the very purpose by which, because of which I take these trainings, is to be able to be able to make people really start working in these things. So my happiest moment would be when one of you are able to make a switch to a real machine learning job in some organization. Okay. And for that, the course may end, because at somewhere it has to end. But even after that, please feel free to remain in touch with me for either the job opportunities or further guidance. I mean, I would be happy to spend time even outside these courses with you. So if you have, say, come across some problem, and if you want me to spend some time on how to resolve that problem, I would be very happy to spend time with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
So if you want to make a switch, just share that CV with me, because it is always handy. Suppose these opportunities also come at random. So if I'm talking to someone and say that, you are training people in ML, is there someone available? Then quickly I can, share your CV. So that would be very helpful if you can share with me, in case you are looking for a change.
Sure, sir.
Sir, to your
Okay,
mail
sir.
ID or on WhatsApp, sir?
You have my email ID, no?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. We have, sir.
Put on the mail ID. That would be better.
Sir, and also I think we can do two projects, sir. One on normal classical learning and deep learning, sir.
Yeah, sure. So
I mean, just you give the topic, sir. We will try to do it in 1 week or 2 weeks. Then you can correct us, sir, so that we'll get our thinking capacity and what algorithm we use, like that.
yeah, so I'll give you the problem statement. I'll also
Yes, sir.
share with you the data set.
Yes, sir.
You can start working on those projects, and I will try to see that these data sets are fairly large, but not very large, because if it is very large, then the in Colab, in the free space, you find problem in how much time it takes for optimization.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Sure, I'll do that. Okay, so if there is nothing else today, then we can end the session today. And next week, let me see if Shubham can take out some time for giving you the exposure on how to maintain your GitHub profile.
Yes, sir.
Otherwise, we will take up the reinforcement learning next week. But I
Okay,
will
sir.
definitely ensure that Shubham is available to give you that.
Git and GitHub. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So with
Okay,
that,
sir.
we'll end the session today, and we'll meet again next week.
Yeah,
Sure,
sir.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.